It is not very good. academic director of Campus Brussels and a professor of political science at Maastricht University. It is a great pleasure to welcome you all to this wonderful event. And it is also a wonderful event in the sense that it showcases Campus Brussels. And Campus Brussels has three main functions. On the one hand, teaching and training. On the other hand, it is also a research community hub. And on the last but not least, it is also a relay between Brussels actors and Maastricht University. Today's event is a perfect example, on the one hand, of the research community hub function, and on the other hand, of the embassy function. Why is it a good example of this? Because the Lancet Commission has done fantastic work and brought together about 40 researchers and policymakers and politicians from all over the world to shed light on a very important topic that is so far very much eclipsed from public and political debate. At least it is not at the center of the debate as it should be. As you will see today, this Lancet Commission wants to raise awareness of the effects of pollution, and that these effects of pollution are not only an environmental issue, but a social issue, a health issue, and a political issue, as the poor are most affected. What is so particularly striking about this project is that it not only sheds light on problems, but also on solutions. And one of the solutions is, for example, the low smoke cook stove. We will hear about this in just a moment. I will now pass over to Richard Fuller, who is the co-chair of the Lancet Commission and the president of Pure Earth, and who will take it from there. Thank you very much.
Hello, can you hear me? Good. Welcome everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. Very grateful to be able to present the results of this work. It's been more than 2 years of work with Dr. Landrigan in New York and myself, bringing together an extraordinary group of people to look at the health and injustice of pollution around the world. What we'll do now is present to you the findings of the report, but first I want to introduce some important folk who are here. Two commissioners are present, Janusz Potocznik, who you know well, of course, and Professor Onno van Schaak from Maastricht University, who had seminal input into the production of this report, and we're very grateful that they're both here and can present some of their work. Without further ado, let me start with a short video.
The world doesn't care enough about pollution. We think of pollution as an environmental issue. We do not think of pollution as a health issue.
It kills more people than war, than hunger, than malaria or AIDS or tuberculosis. All of these pale in comparison.
In 2015, pollution-related diseases accounted for 9.6 million deaths. 92% of that burden is in low and middle income countries. That's big for us. It's big in terms of the distribution of the problem. To put it in plain speak, the distribution is unfair.
It's not been on the public radar because there's been a lack of understanding of just how endemic this problem is and how many people are impacted. It's been forgotten.
We need to make people aware that pollution is damaging them, damaging their children. It may not be visible, it's nonetheless very real.
It is about huge loss of economic, community, and vital human ability. And that's why pollution should receive the attention and the fix that it deserves as a crusher of human capacity.
Human beings are wired to respond to immediate threats. Infectious diseases like Zika, like dengue, that make people quickly and obviously sick really get the public attention. By contrast, non-communicable diseases, chronic diseases that are caused by pollution, learning disabilities, cancer, chronic lung disease, take years to play out. The connection between cause and effect is not visible, and people put it in the back of their mind.
We're all exposed and all at risk, but the effects are seen most heavily on the very young and on the poor. One of the most startling findings in the last several decades really has been the greater vulnerability of the developing fetus and young child to toxic chemicals and pollutants. Brain development is a highly choreographed, tightly programmed process, and any misstep can have serious effects on the child's ability to learn and to contribute to society. We really have a moral obligation to take the science that we have now urgently.
There's air pollution, water pollution, soil, or workplace issues. Within each of those categories, there tend to be the same kind of problems that show up again and again and again. And this is how we should look at pollution, not as some huge, overwhelming issue, but a series of little problems that each need to be solved individually. There are parts of pollution that have been looked at in the international development agenda. There's been a lot of work to improve water supply. And over the last 20 years, we've seen the number of deaths from water pollution drop really substantially. That should serve as a model for what we ought to be doing now.
There's an implicit assumption that's been there for long that part of development is unavoidable massive pollution. It does not have to be that way.
I was growing up in India in the 50s. The air was clear, crisp, cool, wonderful. Things changed in 1991 when the closed Indian market opened up to the world. There was an explosion of industrialization. And with that expansion has come more cars, more traffic, more congestion, more pollution.
India has become vastly more dangerous over the last 20 years because of the air pollution. Dangerous in a way that we've really never seen on the planet.
If you take a broader economic perspective, the health effects of pollution constitute an economic problem because sick people can't go to work or they have to stay home and have other people care for them. And so society incurs all of these costs.
Air pollution and climate change, which are two of the greatest threats to health, are linked very closely because they have a common source, fossil fuel burning.
If we can integrate the toxics agenda into the climate change agenda, it will bring about reductions in climate change and greenhouse gases, but will also save a lot of lives.
There's a series of smelters, and those are all shut down. The mine is closed, but the smelter waste is everywhere, and it has been everywhere for as long as everyone there's been alive. It's not a secret. It's just part of life in Calgary. It's a poison town.
Soil pollution is the one area of pollution that's least recognized because it's not something you can see floating in the air or the water has a horrible color to it. Soil pollution toxicants don't break down, they stay in the soil and can continue to poison people for generations.
We show up, pull out the fabric and cut it to measure for each yard. We wheelbarrow in clean clay soils to cover the fabric. The fabric is both a barrier and a marker later. If you hit the fabric when you're digging, stop. Below there is dirty. A kid who has brain damage from lead poisoning is never going to have the full potential of his life. No matter where you go, parents never want to see their kids getting poisoned. And it can't be fixed, but it can be prevented, and the next kid can be protected.
The trajectory is encouraging, but the pace is slow, and I think the scale thus far is not sufficient. But I see a growing awareness of the necessity of rising to the occasion to tackle the challenge.
Pollution doesn't have to be solved in one day. It won't be solved in one day. The way to get there is to set a 5-year target, a 10-year target, a 15-year target. And the beneficiaries of that progress are going to be the country's children.
If I were to look back 20 years from now, I would hope that all of these countries have adopted pollution as an issue that's something fundamental to their own development strategies. And they're committed to doing things in healthy and productive ways. That's how the world should look.
So thank you all. Are we continuing to have feedback here? Hello? How's that? Still, is that better? Okay, guys, great. Are you okay? Do you need some bit more time? You're okay? All right. So what I'd like to do now is to give you a quick rundown of the results of this work. We look at pollution from 4 different angles. First of all, the burden of disease, which is the social health, death, and disability. Then we look, using that data, at the economic impact of pollution. Quite a lot of work then in terms of the injustice of pollution and the social dimensions related to it. And then, of course, we're very keen to point out that this is a solvable problem, one that can really be addressed without an enormous new paradigm shift in the way we need to look at the world. First, to think on the burden of disease. We define pollution as something that gets put out into the environment as a result of our industriousness that in turn causes us to get sick. And when we look at pollution in that way, we're using data that comes from 3 different sources, the main one being the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation, who create databases, the largest database in the world, of what kills people in different countries and what's caused those particular diseases to occur. This group is out of the University of Washington. They're funded by the Gates Foundation, and they're really the driving force behind the burden of disease analyses that are now starting to drive most of the agendas in public health. We supplement that by looking at WHO data that also looks at the same risk factors, and that's a second check set, if you like, against the IHME data. And we've added to this in some work that has been done by my own organization, Pure Earth, on contaminated sites and the inventory associated with that. When we look at pollution, we're breaking it down into different particular areas of concern. Household pollution, household air pollution, ambient air pollution, water, soil, occupational lead. And there are the different core risk factors that we've defined in the report. You know these well. We'll hear more about indoor air pollution from Professor Van Schaak in a minute. It kills about 3 million people a year. Outdoor air pollution, the problems we see in China and Delhi are really actually not as bad as some of the problems now going on in the Middle East, in parts of Africa, where air pollution has had absolutely no attention. It's responsible for about 4 million deaths per year. Water and sanitation is the one area that's had some good successes. It's been a focal area of the MDGs, whereas the rest of it has not. And numbers here have reduced. It's now at about 1.7 million deaths a year. Soil and chemicals and all the rest are responsible for about 1.1 million deaths, but as I'll show you later, that's a substantial undercount because we don't have the data capable to deal with all of that. And lead poisoning, just lead poisoning on its own is responsible for 500,000 deaths a year. And I want to put those together into 9 million deaths. If you actually add them up individually, you'll see they don't add to 9 million. But the data set that we use looks at overlaps and takes into account for all of that. And so the total is 9 million deaths, 16% of all deaths that occurred in 2015. So here we are with the largest environmental cause of death in the world. And what really stuns me is that's 3 times more than all the deaths that occurred from malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV combined. I mean, that's, you know, we do a lot of work in those areas. In this one, we do so little. 3 times more than that, 15 times more than all the deaths that occur from all of the wars and all of the violent activity, including the US and all of those gun deaths that go on. 15 times more than that die every year from pollution. If I put it in comparison by looking at a range of different public health concerns that are hot on our concern list, Ebola is almost not visible here. It was the year of Ebola in 2015. War and murder here is a few 100,000. Road accidents, malnutrition, drugs and alcohol. There's AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. Salt is a huge cause of hypertension and kills a lot of people as a result. Smoking we all think of as one of the biggest problems that we all should be concerned of from an environmental perspective, but here's pollution. So I think it really puts us in perspective when you start to look at all the other things that are out there. And really what is of main concern is that this is a development issue. The deaths are all in Africa and Southeast Asia. The darker colors here, 1 in 4 deaths that occur in that country are occurring because of pollution. And China and India have such large populations that in terms of gross numbers of deaths, they're right up at the very top. But it's the countries in Africa that we ought to be concerned about because there's so little attention, so little capacity to be able to deal with these public health dramas. And really, Southeast Asia, Africa, all these regions that are of places that we naturally consider in our development agenda need attention in this particular space. We looked also at the way that pollution deaths are changing over time. And this chart's a little complicated, but let me break it down for you. We broke pollution into 2 different types. The traditional kinds of pollution that are associated with abject poverty, sanitation and cook stoves, for example. And we looked at those deaths, and that's the orange line. Over time, they're reducing. That's indicative of the fact that people are moving out of poverty all around the world, and that services are becoming available to them in those spaces. In parallel to that, pollution deaths from industrialization, from things associated with urbanization and the movement into cities and growth. These are deaths associated with urban air, with chemicals, with workplace and the environment, and these are the ones that have very little attention. This number is going up, and this is the trajectory that we're most concerned about. Very important to know that we're also looking at quite a conservative estimate here. There's a lot of toxins that are not included in these estimates. The only real chemical that's associated here with deaths at an environmental level is, in fact, lead. There's nothing in here about the chromium from the tannery industry, or mercury from gold mining, or pesticides from dumps in Africa and the like. Those deaths have not been counted adequately in order for them to be included in IHME and publishable in the Lancet. So there needs to be a lot of work to actually do all of that. And we think that when we do properly quantify the full burden of disease and look at all chemicals, the number will rise substantially by another 3 or 4 million deaths. Of course, as you saw Ricky Pereira talk, this is really about kids, and small, growing young human beings take in a lot more toxin per body size than we do, and the impact is much more substantial. As well as that, their developing brains, neurotoxins, are such an important issue, I think. And I think if we focus on neurotoxicological effects, it hits the whole range of different kinds of toxicants. PM2.5 is now shown to have toxicological effects, both in newborns and now recently also in Alzheimer's and latter life diseases. Of course, the heavy metals have been known to do this for a long time, as are pesticides. But we can see the impact of it when we look at deaths by age. There's a big lump of deaths in very small, below 5, and then the next lump is in the 50s and 60s, where people are dying before their time from cancers and cardiovascular disease. In fact, it's that move and shift from something immediate, diarrheal or treatable or infectious, into non-communicable diseases that we also were able to highlight. Here is the change for all pollution. Non-communicable diseases now takes up about 70% of the burden of disease in all of this. And finally, we looked at and defined a new term called the pollutome. There's another term out there, the exposome, that has a lot of attention in research circles. The pollutome is a subset of the exposome. It's that group of chemicals that causes health problems. And we've only quantified in this report the top corner of that. So there's a lot more chemicals that have health effects, but we haven't included their total burden of disease in it. And then, of course, more concerning, there are so many things out there that we haven't done the science on. We don't really know what impact they're having. So things like endocrine disruptors and brominated flame retardants and the like. We need to do the data on them, find out what their health impact is and be able to include them so we can properly quantify how all this goes. The pollutome, we hope, will become a starting point for a development of research and give us much more better data, but then translate, more importantly, into the policy work that needs to happen within our own countries, within the European Union and the US, and more importantly, out into the developing world where these impacts are much less quantified at the moment. Here are some of the new chemical pollutants that are of concern: endocrine disruptors, emerging neurotoxicants, chemical herbicides, and the like. Important also to recognize that climate change and pollution are intricately linked. And as was well pointed out in the video, this is a function of the fact that the source of them, of many of these two issues, is the same. It's from the burning of fossil fuels. And so the benefit here is tackling pollution will have a climate change benefit. And we hope that message can resonate with the climate change agenda. Let me move on to the second part, the economic impacts of pollution. And there are a few key outcomes. The first key outcome of the research is that the loss of productivity from all the death and disability is about 2% of GDP. So if you're a developing country and you're losing 2% of your potential growth, that's a big deal. And this is a real hard number, simply because people are sick and not able to work, or they're dying before they've had their productive life. So it's an important number to realize. We also calculate the impact of pollution in terms of willingness to pay, the welfare costs that we're all quite familiar with. That number is just staggering. It's equivalent to 6% of global GDP. It's at $4.6 trillion a year. The two takeaways I'm sure you've all seen in newspapers and articles related to this report are the 9 million deaths, 16% of all deaths, and this huge number, $4.6 trillion a year, that's lost because of pollution. And these are, in fact, still underestimates, as we talked about before. And one of the key messages in this report is that inevitability of pollution, this consideration that people have. We have to let countries go through a polluting phase for them to industrialize. We researched this very deeply within the report. There's no evidence for that. There's evidence instead that clean growth, greener growth, is better for the long term, it's more stable, and it produces better results. A quick review of the social injustice of poverty. It's, of course, the poorest who live in the toxic locations. And this is true not only in the developing world, but here in the European Union and in the richer countries. The poorest people can't afford to move to cleaner places. It's the cheapest land, it's the free place where they can live. It's the place where they can find work that's going to damage them the most. And of course, those communities are the ones then that bear the brunt of pollution and have most of the burden of disease associated with it. 92%, in fact, of deaths occur in low and middle income countries. So on its own, just looking at that particular statistic, it's clear we have a problem here of social injustice. Women and children are much more impacted by this. Children, of course, and women, because they're looking after their kids. Indoor cook stoves, for example, the impact there is felt much more on women and children. The same is true for chemicals and the rest of it. And it's often the marginalized communities, indigenous communities and the like, that are doing the dirtiest work, that are looking after the things that no one else wants to, and who are getting the sickest. I also want to point out how well all of this fits into the SDGs. SDG 3.9 in the health agenda talks to reducing the burden of disease, of death and illness from hazardous chemicals in air, water and soil pollution. very direct metric here that's in the SDGs. But in fact, pollution really resonates throughout all of the SDGs. Just a few of them listed here. But in each of these, there are aspects where pollution will bring about strong and sustainable results. Let me move on to the piece I like best, because I think this is the most important thing. This is a solvable issue. It can be done country to country. We need to put our development monies into this particular area, because solutions here can make enormous difference, and we haven't paid much attention to it. These are deaths from pollution and from AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. But here is the development assistance into that area. $28 billion a year into those three infectious diseases, and I wouldn't take any away from them, but here's our investment into the modern area of pollution. It's somewhere between $50 and $100 million a year, and clearly that is a disparity that we need to correct. And we know it works, and that these investments do bring effect. This graph here shows over time a reduction in pollution emissions in the US from 1970 to 2015, all the time while an enormous growth in economic output. So this is here to demonstrate that investments in this area will bring strong growth to countries. Why aren't we seeing more energy in this area? There are a few reasons why we haven't seen this become a demand from countries or within the development agendas of most of our institutes. Part of it is that we all have belief that pollution is inevitable and that you have to let countries go through all of that. That's in the background, and it's promoted by industrialists who are benefiting from that, of course. But part of it is that pollution is an environmental issue, or is it an issue of the Ministry of Transport, or is it an issue of the Ministry of Industry or Health? Which industry, which ministry has responsibility? In the end, no one takes responsibility for it. And so it falls between the cracks, and we need to bring about some effort to deal with this. And I think if we can properly bring the right solutions to different countries, to bring collaboration between different entities, we can bring about interventions that can be done successfully. When we look also at the pathway for pollution as an international agenda item, it is getting a little bit more traction. United Nations Environment, their assembly this year will focus on pollution. There's a focus on it at the World Bank. There's a little bit of attention beginning to grow within some of the agencies. The European Commission has been a strong and steady supporter at a very small level in this agenda, but I think we should see more and more attention going as this moves forward. And here is how you actually solve the problem. You do a couple of simple things. The first thing is, country by country, you sit down with all those different ministries, health, environment, transport, industry, and the like, and you look at all of their key pollution problems and work out which ones are the worst and which ones have not had sufficient attention, and more investment would produce measurable results in terms of public health. And then look to prioritize interventions based on an analysis that looks at death and disability and political realities as well. And this particular analysis has been done now in 3 countries with some support from the European Commission and with our partners with UNIDO as well. And it's very welcomed, and there's a great demand for this kind of analysis to start with. But what that does then is create a series of programs that will reduce the impact of pollution. And the solutions and the programs that it creates are ones that are repeated again and again and again, country to country, and they're well known. In air, you move to cleaner cook stoves, as Dr. Van Schaak will show us, or you do things related to transport with controlling emissions from diesel cars, for example. In water, there's investments in sanitation that are well known, in chemicals the like. All these things are known solutions that can be brought to bear, and investments can be made either by the international community or within the country resources themselves. And this, I think, is where we need to go. Help the countries do a little bit of planning to work out where they can make the most good with scarce resources, and then fund those particular programs, and do this as a country-driven initiative. That's where I want to see us move in the international development agenda moving forward. I want to add two other components to that. One is we need more research. We need a research budget that can enable us to better quantify the burden of disease and to help the countries do the research that enables the right policy decisions. So there needs to be a research component. And then we need to have a tracking mechanism in place as well. And the organization Global Alliance on Health and Pollution that I've started as a part of our work with Pure Earth and brought together all of the international agencies and governments is the right place to do that. So we need to track how well we're doing and share experiences from country to country. One other piece that's interesting, as part of this Lancet release, to help people, citizens in countries, we've also started a database, a website, pollution.org. And I don't have a picture of it here, but please go and have a look at it. When you log into it, you will see the actual results of pollution in your own neighborhood. Wherever there's a credible data source for air pollution, for water, or soil contamination, you'll see it and be able to see exactly what's showing up there. More important, though, you can add a story. If you're not seeing the pollution that you know is in your backyard, you can add your own story into this website, and it will get vetted and checked, and that will be added into the data set as well as we move forward. So it's a place to empower citizens to go out and do something productive in their pollution efforts. Critical, of course, all of this work, the Lancet itself and all the background work in these pollution agendas has been very wonderfully supported by the European Commission. I'm pleased that DG Environment is here. Daniel Calleja, thank you very much. Good to see you. Arrived just recently. Been a great supporter of this, along with our partners in UNIDO. Germany, Sweden, Norway have been very generous to help with all of this, as has the US, USAID, and the National Institute of Environment, Health and Safety have also been strong supporters of this work. So I'm going to pause here and suggest that we now go to presentations from our commissioners. But before we do that, let me introduce a couple of people who unfortunately could not make it and instead have sent some video commentaries. And the first, let me introduce Achim Steiner, who I'm sure you all know well. He used to be in charge of the United Nations Environment Program. He's now running UNDP, and he was one of the earliest supporters of this work in the Lancet and has been a strong and passionate supporter of the solutions work that goes on in all of this. And let's just listen to him for a second.
Greetings to everyone gathered for the launch of the report of the Lancet Commission on Pollution and Health. As one of the earliest supporters of this commission, I congratulate the Lancet, the Global Alliance on Health and Pollution, and the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai on this important and timely report, which provides clear and compelling evidence on the health burden of pollution and articulates the economic and development implications of inaction. The message of the report is clear. A failure to take the threats of pollution seriously is detrimental not only to the health of our children, families and communities, but also to our economies and the future of our planet at large. As the report highlights, addressing pollution is about equity and justice. It is not a luxury for rich countries, but an imperative for all. Pollution disproportionately kills the poor and vulnerable, with 92% of deaths occurring in low and middle income countries. Addressing pollution and health is also an issue of intergenerational equity, since toxic pollutants remain in the soil and water for generations. The United Nations Development Programme supports country efforts to eradicate poverty and to achieve sustainable development goals. We cannot do this without taking into account the multiple levels and mechanisms through which environmental degradation and pollution drive sickness, inequities and poverty while exacerbating climate change and biodiversity loss. Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and action on pollution and health will require integrated, cross-sectoral approaches and, of course, adequate financing and political will. We look forward to working in close partnership with members of the Global Alliance on Health and Pollution and many others within the family, including our sister agencies, United Nations Environment Programme and the World Health Organization, to just mention two, to move this agenda forward together. And together we have the expertise and ability to facilitate cross-sectoral action and catalyze funding for integrated health and environment interventions. Through individual and collective action, we can ensure that this report will contribute to real solutions and a healthier and more sustainable future for all. This is, after all, an agenda that belongs perfectly and into the center of Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
I really like it that Akin talks about solutions, bringing forward this agenda into the SDGs and finding ways to be able to reduce this burden of mortality. We had, unfortunately, an apology from President Carlos Salinas, the President of Mexico from 1984 to 92, but he did send a video announcement in. Let's listen to President Salinas.
Congratulations on the presentation of the Lancet report in Brussels. We just had a magnificent event in New York City on the occasion of presenting the report here, and that provided us with a great stimulus to go ahead into this transformation of our research, investigation, and works into action in order to address this very delicate problem of the impact of contamination on the health of human beings. The report clearly proves, with sound information, clear analysis, and very direct policy recommendations, that the link between contamination and health is creating a very severe problem among human beings. And the dimension proves that it goes beyond other challenges in the health areas, because this one, the link between contamination and health, is related to the quality of life of the population, mainly those in circumstances of poverty. Yes, it's a problem of emerging economies, but it is present in any economy in the world. And the report clearly proves that there is no trade-off between tackling the problems of contamination and at the same time achieving higher rates of growth and investment in our economies. That is why we must change the conversation and bring to the fore these important issues beyond what is usually debated in electoral campaigns or an everyday life of decision makers, which is related to issues of the well-being of the population and improvement in their standards of living, but seldom those related to the long-term impact of the contamination of air, soil, and everyday life on the health of the inhabitants of our countries. In Mexico, it's an important issue. During my administration, we work hard on facing them. And today, with Richard and other members of Pure Earth, we are working on tackling the problem of lead in pottery, which has a very significant impact because this is the pottery manufactured by indigenous communities with great artistry, but using lead to give the glazing effect of the pottery and being cooked in low temperature ovens. The lead, when it is the food that is in the pottery, may contaminate the food and therefore affect mostly children and anyone who gets into contact with it. We are acting and acting now. And this is a specific example of the kind of initiatives that the Lancet report is proposing as policy decisions which have to be addressed with the seriousness that the problem demands. I'm very sure that this occasion in Brussels will give additional stimulus to go from words to action and to influence policy decisions which will have a very important impact on an issue that is 21st century because of its dimension. I'm sure that given the quality of those participating in this very great endeavor, we will make it succeed.
I also love it when I hear someone of that level talk about tangible physical programs and things that we can measure and make success out of. And speaking of which, let me now pass over to some of our esteemed guests and fellow authors on this report. Professor Ona van Schaak, would you like to come up first and talk about your wonderful work on cook stoves?
Okay, thank you. Shall I take this one? This? Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Rich. Looking forward to give you some more insight in one of the aspects. You have already heard many highlights of the report, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the effects on the pollution, air pollution. What you can see here is the relative contribution of air pollution compared to soil pollution, compared to occupational poisoning and to soil poisoning. So what you see here is that at least 50%, but I would say it is 2/3 of the total number of deaths are caused in different time periods by the inhalation of air pollution. And that's really very stable, what you can see in the time. So it's huge. It is more than 2/3. You have seen this map already, so that it is mainly concentrated, the problem in the low and middle income countries. But what you can see here, the blue lines, is that in all different parts of the world, it is again the air pollution which is causing the main problem. That doesn't mean that the other factors are not important, but the good news is that we can do something about it, as Rich already told you. And especially I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the effects on air pollution and what we can do to avoid these devastating effects. At the moment, nowadays, almost half of the world population is daily exposed to smoke due to the fact that they have an open fire for their cooking purposes or for their heating purposes. Can you imagine? Half of the world population is being exposed to smoke every day. Biomass fuel is used as a primary energy source by almost half of the world population, and that's really huge. Biomass fuel is an umbrella term for firewood, for animal dung, and for crop waste. It's estimated that in a little bit more than 2 decades, in 2014, still 1.2 billion people will be reliant on biomass fuel. So it is not at the moment a problem, but it will be a problem in the future as well. More than 50% of the premature deaths among children under the age of 5 are due to pneumonia caused by air pollution. I took this photograph myself of this woman with a child on her knees directly after she was cooking, and she was constantly coughing. And she wasn't aware of the fact that it was caused by smoke. Not at all. And her little child of only a few months old was coughing as well. And that is actually the cause. It is the biggest child killer in slums at the moment, under the age of 5. The biggest child killer. Women are also 3 times more likely to develop COPD when they are exposed to indoor pollution. How old do you think this lady is? She looks like she's 70. But she was, when I took this photograph, she was only 47 years of age. Can you imagine? 47 years of age. And when I came back 1 year later to the slum and tried to visit her again, she died due to COPD. And that's daily reality, what we see in these areas, especially in these deprived areas like slums. Some people say it's easily solvable. We can easily change things. We should switch to clean fuels, like for instance solar energy or electricity or natural gas. But it's easily said if you have not more to spend than $1 a day with your family, because that's daily reality in these poor income countries. They do not have the possibility to afford to switch to cleaner fuels, and they are trapped in a vicious circle, and they will be dependent in the coming years as well on biomass fuel, so on wood, on dung and whatsoever, poisoning the air. What you can see here is actually what's happening when somebody is sitting in a shack in one of the slums. You see here 24 hours being exposed to the most devastating indoor pollution factor, the PM2.5. Rich already told you about it. And what you can see here is that during lunchtime, during dinner time and during breakfast, 6 to 9 in the morning and 6 to 9 in the evening, they are being exposed to very, very high levels. You see here the dotted line, which is, according to WHO, it's a safe line. So every concentration below this 0.25 is relatively safe, but you see every day they're being exposed to a much higher concentration, and sometimes even to a 6-fold concentration, happening every day. But there is good news, as I told you already. It's not easily solvable, but there are very, very good examples, and they have been described in this Lancet report as well. So, for instance, in China, we have seen a very, very good program by the Chinese government. They introduced the National Improved Stove Program, and they distributed 180 million stoves among farmers. So in the rural areas. It was the most successful program thus far. And also not only successful in terms of numbers, but also in terms of success. So there was a study which accompanied the introduction of this cook stove program. And what you can see here is that there was a reduction in incidence of lung cancer of more than 30%, which is really huge, in more than 21,000 Chinese farmers. So we have evidence that we can change something about it, but it's not easily doable. I'm going to tell a little bit more about slums, because that is really the situation with the most deprived problems people are constantly facing. Here you see some pictures of slums in India. And here is how it looks like inside the slum. This is a relatively good slum. It is a shack of 3 by 3 meters. Families are living in here. Families often with 3, 4, 5 children. Can you imagine 3 by 3 meters? They're doing everything in this room. I wouldn't call it a house, but it's just a room. They are sleeping there. They're eating there. They're cooking there. Children are doing their homework there. They're doing everything in there. Maybe you're wondering why they are not cooking outside. This is the reason why. In most slums, especially in India, there is no outside, because there is no space left. So they have to cook inside. They have no other possibilities, which means that they are being exposed daily. And that's what the situation is. There have been several efforts also in India, not only in China, but in many places in the world, but also in India. There have been many efforts undertaken to improve the situation. And one such effort was the National Program on Improved Chula in 1984 by the government. The Indian government subsidized all households willing to buy an improved cook stove. But the problem was that soon after the start of the program, there were several problems. The program did not meet the needs of the consumers, and as a result, the stoves were not user-friendly. When you are introducing an improvement, you really have to know what the wishes and needs of the consumers are. So that's absolutely important. It did not target, this program did not target those regions most in need. It was often not affordable for them to buy these stoves. It is important to involve the local community in any program, but also in indoor air pollution improvement. So what we did a cultural anthropological study in one of the biggest cities in India, in Bangalore. And we almost lived for 3 years in slums. I wasn't, but several of my PhD students were, and they did really a great job. It was amazing what they did. They listened very carefully to the slum dwellers. What are your wishes? What are your needs? What are you longing for? What do you want to change? And together with the slum dwellers, they created what I would call the most ideal stove. So what you can see here is this lady with a child on her knees. She is explaining in a clear way what an ideal stove would look like. So we were very focused on sharing the needs and the preferences embedded in the cooking preferences. And what is very important is the affordability. Can you afford it? How much wood do you need? And we were very successful. After 3 years carefully listening and after developing 17 prototypes of a stove, so it takes a lot of time, we developed a stove which was completely compatible with their wishes and with their needs. It doesn't cost more than a few dollars, and it is completely compatible with the way they're cooking, and they were very glad. One of the ladies, which you will see in the film, she was crying when she had that stove, because she said, I'm so satisfied with what you have been doing, and you're really carefully listening to us. We have to empower these slum dwellers, and the women should be involved in discovering and exploring the improvement. And it takes a step-by-step approach. It's a long process, but it takes, and you can get success. What I will show you, if the video is working, it's a good illustration, I think, of the work that we have been doing in slums. It's less than 1 minute. It's 58 seconds, so it doesn't take a long time, but it's clearly explaining what we are doing.
Imagine, each time you want to use your stove to cook a meal, the room slowly fills with smoke. With each breath you take, you feel the smoke entering your lungs, but there's nothing you can do about it. In the many slums in India, this is the reality every day. And each year, about 500,000 women and children die as a result of lung cancer, COPD, and other diseases. Check our website to see how we work on solutions for these problems, together with the local community. And follow us on Facebook or Twitter.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you kindly. Great to see your work and great to see the impact that you're having in the world. It's now my pleasure to invite Janusz Potocznik. He's the former commissioner for the environment here in the European Commission. What is critical about Janusz's approach is the structural basis for policy that's behind all of these solutions. And I look forward to your comments in that area. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rich. Yeah, I know. Thanks. Good day to everybody. It's a great honor to be one of the Lancet commissioners. And I was basically following the work quite intensively all the time and also contributing as much as I can. So I will push the whole story a bit further than you basically have done it till now, because I think we need to start dealing with the essence of the problem, which it is. This is my quote, which I have contributed to the press release, which is basically saying that I think it's extremely important that we raise the attention to the problems, because this is causing then the action. But even more than that, it's important that we go deeper, that we try to address the drivers and the pressures. Some of you might know this is a very famous approach which is done by the scientists. It talks about driving forces, pressure, state, and impact. The things which we were looking today are predominantly here, state and impact. And I think it's really important that you go to this phase, to the pressures and drivers, because then you have to do responses on impacts and the state, by the way, and that's exactly what you are contributing to. But if you do not do the responses also on the drivers and the driving forces, then you are at the same time solving the problem and increasing the problem. One of the things which came as a conclusion from, I'm also co-chairing International Resource Panel, which is also heavily supported, I see Astrid there, by the European Commission, for which we are very grateful. But one of the conclusions of that is that in the midterm, it will not be the shortage of resources which will cause that we will have to limit the thinking about economic development, but it will be the health consequences and environmental consequences caused by this irresponsible use of the resources. So one of the conclusions of our work is also that you know clearly that among 17 SDGs there are trade-offs, and which are, by the way, unavoidable. That sustainable consumption and production, it's the most efficient strategy to avoid these trade-offs and create synergies to resolve the development and environmental challenges articulated in the SDGs. So focusing on how we produce and consume, it's essential if you want to deal with the problem of eradicating poverty, if you want to deal with the problem of zero hunger, and I can continue, by the way. So if you don't change that, you can dream about the rest. But let me now try to explain you, this will be a simplified story of the economic system in which we are living. Price signals which we are sending to the markets. Financial capital terribly overvalued. Human capital undervalued. And natural capital in many cases not valued at all. Then we have the market, where producers and consumers meet, and you know well that the prices are deciding the quantities. And we have rational decisions there. And of course, the quantities of some of the things which we are consuming are simply too big because they are decided by price signals which are totally in unbalanced position. So we have then inbuilt economic, social, and environmental imbalances. And we are surprised by that. We simply shouldn't be surprised because that's how the whole model works. I was 5 years when I was responsible also for the pollution fighting that economic, social, and environmental would be on the same basis. But in essence, that's terribly wrong. How the system would need to look is that the ecosystems would be the one who are deciding socio-technical systems which are providing us with social needs and value. And this was nicely put together in a bit more complex picture which was done by the European Environment Agency, where you see that energy system, food system, mobility system, policy, technology, value, science, market, industry are basically all depending actually on the ecosystem in which we are all together, with which we are all together working and living. And the major problem, if you go from the things which I explained you before on the prices, it's actually in externalities. What are externalities? Externalities are costs which are existing, but we deny them. I have heard as environment commissioners many times that we cannot introduce that and that measure because it has additional cost. It doesn't have additional cost because the cost is already existing, but we are denying that that cost is existing. Either it's paid by health system, it's paid by your health, it's paid by farmer who has less crops, or it's in the best way paid by the next generations because they cannot complain. So in essence, what is the problem of the system is that the profits are privatized and costs are socialized. And that's what we do and that's what we talk about. And while we have, for example, in Europe, clear rules that you cannot in depth in financial terms, you know, the famous rule of 3% of budgetary expenditures, which we have no rule on indebtedness when it comes to pollution, when it comes to environmental consequences and so on. So it's pretty clear that we need to go deeper in the system change if we are sincerely trying to deal with those issues and questions. One of the solutions which Commission is now promoting, which I also started promoting during my times, it's connected to the so-called circular economy. It's basically an instrument how to change the things on better, how to keep the resources in the production and consumption cycle for a longer time and how to keep their value higher, which has good economic consequences but has enormous positive side effects on environment, on human health also. There are 3 questions in particular which I think would deserve in the future special attention. One, it is that we should avoid the danger of becoming another Western model, so we should connect it with the social story. And if we do not do that, this will not be something which will be globally accepted as a potential model of solution. Another thing is to link, this is the famous Ellen MacArthur butterfly. On the right-hand side, you have abiotic resources. On the left-hand side, you have biotic resources. And when you talk about bioeconomy, you basically talk about how you can switch some of the products which are today based on abiotic resources to abiotic. But of course, this has to be done also on the biotic side by respecting sustainability and by respecting the rules and principles of the circular economy. Otherwise, we have problems like we have had with the biofuels target and so on, which obviously proved to be wrong. And the last thing on which we should work, all the climate story, it's pretty much attention which is given to the carbon and to the greenhouse gases. But if you really want to solve the problem of climate change and also the pollution, you need to address land, water, materials at minimum. And this is, in essence, then, a real low-carbon, resource-efficient economy. This is a trajectory, how the countries are developing. On the horizontal X, you have Human Development Index, so more right you are, more developed you are. On the vertical X, you have ecological footprint, so environmental footprint. The dots are the countries, and the dots around it red are the European Union member states. So the green corner here contains all the countries in the world where people are living well within the planetary boundaries. So not a lot you would find. The problem is that everybody in the development first goes up, and then when we face many of the problems, which of course the developed part faced earlier, and we started to deal with them 20, 30 years ago already, then we start to go down. But the real problem is, of course, here, because many of those solutions which we provided left the pollution here. And when those countries will be developing, and if we are half serious about implementing SDGs, it's actually how to leapfrog those countries and how to make them sure that they do not repeat the wrong decisions which we have done here. And majority of the solutions and majority of the responsibility, it's here. It's among developed countries. Because we need first and foremost to show that we are able and ready, that we would go down, and we have to show we are, to a large extent, mastering also technologies and knowledge, that we are ready to help, that some of the things which you have seen in the pictures before would not be anymore the reality of the life which we are facing. So, in short, we have many concepts: sustainable growth, low carbon growth, circular economy growth, green growth, resource efficient growth, energy efficiency, decoupling, 3Rs, ecological civilization, cradle to cradle, bioeconomy, eco-economy, blue economy. All that are actually instruments which we try to use to show that what we actually have to do is we need a new economic model based on sustainable consumption and production, integrating all pillars of sustainability, and that is necessary and actually unavoidable. In a way, like one of my colleagues said, we have to fix a broken compass. For the first time in the human history, we face the emergence of a single, tightly coupled human socio-ecological system of planetary scope. And when we talk about globalization, we are actually not aware of that. This is the real difference. It's planetary scope, whatever we do. Market, economy, climate change, technologies, internet, everything. It's transport, everything. It's basically today global. So our responsibility, collective and individual, for driving the future has enormously increased comparing to the previous generation, and we should simply understand that. For me, the most important ingredients, if you want to solve the problem, which are, by the way, missing, are governance and leadership. I will not talk about leadership, rather, but about governance. It is pretty clear that if you have all the things organized on a global scale, while at the same time national leaders are pretty much talking how to keep sovereignty on their level, this will not work. So we have one best example on which we should be proud, which is actually working. By the way, that's European Union. Because 70 years ago, we have decided that we would like to avoid conflicts and wars. And 17 years, we have been successful. Of course, there are problems. There are good and bad examples. And we are going slowly and steadily through those problems. But it was a way how to avoid conflicts. And I think that if we look to the global situation today, to that planetary scope which I have explained before, the world is currently pretty much focusing, dealing with the same solution. How we will deal with those problems. Pollution in particular, because as it was rightly said by many of you before, it's not getting enough attention. But if we want to solve the pollution without really addressing how we will change the way our economic system, the way we produce and consume, will not work. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan. It's wonderful to have people thinking through these things from such a structural perspective, and I'm always learning so much more every time you speak on how these issues should be resolved. So thank you kindly. I'd like to now invite our core group up to the front here. And so Professor and Janec, would you like to join? And Daniel Kejeha, would you like to come and join us up the front? And I'm also pleased to welcome Violeta Gordelevic from HEAL. Where are you, Violeta? Ah, thank you. And if I might pass you over to Nilguntas from UNIDO. UNIDO has been a superb partner with us for many years to act as our moderator, and we'll take questions from you all. Nilgun, the mask is yours.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, panelists, DG Kalea, all of you. Good morning. As UNIDO, we are very proud and pleased to be part of this initiative with support from the European Commission since 2009. So it has not been easy, but thanks to Richard and the Blacksmith Institute and thereafter the Pure Earth, we have made some progress, and we are happily here today trying to once again put the pollution and health agenda onto to the global level. We are also happy that the UN Environment Assembly this year is going to handle that and possibly make a political commitment. So, with that, I would like to open the floor to your questions, short interventions. And while you're thinking, if I may, I would like to call on Violeta to do a short intervention since she's just joined the panel, and she's from HEAL. She's an economist. HEAL is the Health and Environment Alliance of the European countries. Please.
Thank you very much. So yes, indeed, I'll just take 3 minutes to give you a little bit of an introduction to what we as a civil society organization that's been working on exactly this issue for about the past decade observed, and what maybe 3 statements are that this report makes and that we've partly already addressed that I just like to highlight because we believe that they're very crucial for the way forward. Very briefly, our work has very much been focused on engaging the health sector and the health community in our work. So we've been very much dealing with the health impacts of pollution and trying to use the health sector to push for policy change. And the first point I really want to mention is about what we already briefly touched upon, that political willingness is the key here. I've actually just last week have seen a small survey that was done in London, which shows that more than 80% of London citizens are very well aware that pollution is harming their health. And they all very well want to do something about it. So this is not so much about engaging the public anymore, convincing the public anymore, because we've seen in our work that the public is very well aware of how harmful pollution is. And so this is really about getting this report and getting the findings of this report to the people in charge to create this political leadership. I very briefly want to mention here that the health community, that the health sector, both in Europe and globally, has really been at the forefront to push change around pollution and health. So there is plenty of campaigns and initiatives that have been started worldwide where we have doctors and other health professionals take a stance and really try to make this happen. We have a big campaign such as Unmask My City, which is a big campaign trying to improve air quality in cities. We have the EDC Free Europe campaigns, which are really focused on chemicals. And even the WHO, as really the voice of the health community, with its own Breathe Life campaign, is focusing on the issue. So the health sector is aware, the public is aware, it's really the political leadership that's missing. And I'd just like to make one very strong second point. It's really important, I think, to raise, which the report talks about, but which we haven't heard much about it so far. We do know that there are countries in Europe and worldwide who are implementing certain programs already and who are doing a good job. There's countries who have started to commit to, ban diesel cars from their cities. Or there's countries that, implemented certain emission control standards and air quality standards. But I really like to highlight that all of that means nothing if those same countries at the very same time keep pumping billions worth of public funds, of taxpayer money, into the very industry that we already mentioned is causing a big chunk of this pollution. So if we keep subsidizing oil, gas, and coal to the degree we do at the time of the Paris Agreement, at the time of climate disaster worldwide, and at the time of 9 million deaths, I think we're not addressing the source of the problem, and we're not serious about it. So just to really highlight that aspect, so one of the first things I would say, if we want to beat pollution, we definitely have to stop funding it. And I think we can all agree on that.
Thank you, Violet, for being the voice of the people. Now we return to the audience. Please first identify yourself and kindly be brief. Please.
Yes, good morning. My name is Ulf Björnholm. I represent UNEP, or UN Environment. And I'd just like to say a few words about the upcoming event that was mentioned several times here. I think it's very relevant, and it links to the solution part of the report. Just also to say that I had the pleasure to work both for Mr. Potočnik and his air quality team a few years ago, and I also worked for Achim Steiner when he was head of UN Environment, so it's a pleasure to see these two contributors. And I'd like to start by commending really the authors and the contributors, including our sister organization, UNIDO, to this fundamental report. I think if you don't have awareness, you go nowhere. But that said, awareness will also not be sufficient unless you really have action. You need action at every level. Global level, EU level is absolutely key, government level, but breaking down to cities, stakeholders as well. So this is exactly what we're trying to achieve with the UN Environment Assembly. This is, by the way, not a UN Environment or UNEP event. It is the UN Fora for Environment Ministers. So it covers the whole of the UN, and it's very broad, and we expect some 120, 30, 40 environment ministers to show up in Nairobi in just a bit more than 1 month's time to talk about pollution, to talk about the solutions to these problems that are highlighted here. And the way we're going about it is a bit different than we used to do it. It's more comprehensive, it's more ambitious. The UN is known to adopt political declarations that is then put in a drawer. We will try to adopt a political declaration. We will try also to make that matter by making it more, let's say, citizen-friendly, making the language clearer and simpler so that it's understandable by governments, by stakeholders, and by citizens as well. But that's only one part of the agenda. I think it is still important to have a global response to these challenges and to have a UN response to that at high political level. But it has to be combined with other aspects. So these will be supported by specific resolutions which go much into detail on those issues mentioned in the report: soil, air, chemicals, and water specifically. So there will be more guidance coming from governments. But of course that is also not enough. So what we're trying to do is to engage with governments, stakeholders, including the private sector and citizens, for them to act as well. So not to keep it at an abstract UN level. So we're asking governments, first of all, to bring real commitments to UNEA, to present the environment ministers or the commissioners, to present concrete actions to abate pollutions as voluntary commitments. We're also asking the private sector and civil society to do exactly the same. And this is important, and I'd like you all to know, we're actually engaging with individual citizens as well. We have something called Beat Pollution, or the Clean Planet Pledge. There's some information material outside the doors if you haven't received it, where each and every one of us, and I recommend you to do this, it's very easy, it's actually fun as well. You can make your own individual pledge to complement the pledges that are also necessary at global, government, and EU level. So take a look at this, and I'll stop by inviting Mr. Calleja, who I know will comment at the end, to take up 3 challenges, and I know you're going to like them. One is to bring EU commitments to Nairobi in a month's time to UNEA, concrete commitments. And I know you're already going to do that, so let's hear what you have to say. The second is to look forward. We will have, we have a debate going on about the future of the EU. I'd invite you to make sure that this debate, as far as you can, will include a very, very strong pollution dimension, because if this is not the future of the EU, then I don't know what. And it has to be also, of course, reflected in the real action in the budget of the EU. And the third challenge would be to, and again, I know you're doing this, so it's probably an open door for you, to engage with your colleagues in the Development Cooperation Directorate. Because to my knowledge, there is not a lot on pollution being done there. And I think this has to change, because this is about real life and death matters in the developing world. So why doesn't the development cooperation from the EU do more on air pollution in particular, I would say? This is my 3 challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Ulf. Just to set the record correctly, DevCo has been, and EU has been, the most consistent and strong supporter of at least one of the pieces of this puzzle, the soil pollution, with over 13 million euros invested, which has leveraged at least as much funding from the World Bank and bilateral donors. So EU has been leading the way since 2009. Is it enough? No. But did it bring us here? Yes. Is it giving us a vision and a new approach, a new, a good agenda for UN environment and the UN family to pursue? Yes. So we have to thank the EU for its support strongly. Yes, sir. Yeah. Please.
Good morning. Maurizio Maggiore from DG Research in the Commission. I also had the pleasure from a distance to work for Commissioner Potocnik at the time. I would like to, link first of all about what Mr. Kodielewicz said about health and connect this with some actions we are doing because we have launched in the forthcoming work program a big initiative on pollution trying to tackle it from many angles that have been, let's say, neglected or simply not studied enough. And we have a part on health impact of particles. So that will be as a total 30 to 40 million. And therefore, I want to take this occasion, since many people in the audience maybe are concerned with this, to invite to look at our work program in transport. That's why I come here, because the health people, of course, have their own constituency, but for us, it's a kind of first time that we do it. At the same time, we are trying to cover a lot of other areas, which I think in some areas have not been mentioned. For instance, education of people. I'm looking for, from the point of view of transport. We know that we have cars that have certain problems, and the way you drive them makes a difference. So if you know you have a polluting car, I think it's important to educate what to do about it. One message, I think, to cities is look into that. We are trying to bring a solution, but unless the cities say, take London, they slapped 10 pounds per day to certain cars. If you say you fit the retrofit, you don't pay it, that would be an incentive to apply this solution. And finally, by the way, many of these topics are open to international cooperation because we recognize that this is a world problem, and therefore the health or the education, for instance, is something that will be true everywhere. So we think that these are paths that can be followed to help clean the air, at least.
Yes, sir. Of course, please.
I've read some of the program that you've sent, so thank you so much. And I'm really supporting what this Horizon 2020, I think it's a Horizon 2020 program. And what I'm particularly glad of is that you're also focusing on the educational part. Because I think it's so important that we get, it should be the ownership of citizens. So they should own the problem as well. For instance, we see, you mentioned the example of London, but what we see at the moment in the Netherlands, we have yesterday, there was the announcement that one of the biggest cities in the Netherlands, that Arnhem, they will not be allowed in 3 years' time for diesel cars to get in. And what we see at the moment is that we see a huge change compared to 10 years ago. That 10 years ago there were many objections against such measures, political measures, because it was much more top-down experienced. And what we see nowadays, because of the education in news media, but also in other areas, we see a real change. And we see much more support for these kinds of measures. So I think it's a very good topic. How can we improve the education to just human beings, as we all are?
Just 2 points. One, basically, Violetta started. I don't know if you're aware. Recently, the OECD published the Green Growth Indicators 2017, and one of the facts which is revealed there is that the fossil fuel subsidies in the OECD countries in the years 2000-2014 were in those countries growing and faster than their GDP. So it's in the years when you talk constantly how you will fight against climate change, you go with the policy there. So, and these are the countries which can, by the way, afford different policies and should go differently. And that's why I said that the developed countries should show that we are ready and able because if we will not show, this will not change. And the second point is on the cities. There are some, we will come very soon with a report which is called Weight of the Cities. It's actually a report on the resource requirements for 2050. It's in the final phase before publication. We have still to do some final polishing, but it's close. There are some things which are really eye-opening. For example, two facts. One is that half of the cities which will exist in 2050 have not yet been built, more than half. And, for example, one is also that China has used in 3 years, 2011 or 10, 13, something like that, more cement than United States in the whole 20th century when they were building US cities. But but that's not the point. My point is that there was one wave of urbanization which happened in the developed part of the world. We are just on the edge, this generation, of the next wave of urbanization which will happen in developing part of the world. We have a unique once-life chance to do the things right, because if we will do them wrong, then we are stuck to problems, because cities are the center of pollution, and if we do not somehow quickly agree and help those countries that they will not go the way how we have done in the cities, then God help us, actually. Yeah.
Thank you. Indeed, we need to focus on everything, on resource efficiency, not only greenhouse gases, but materials and energy and water, and which create the pollution when used. Input from the audience, questions, comments, yes, Christophe.
Yes, thank you. I'm Christophe Yvetot. I'm the head of UNIDO Brussels office. I take the floor since nobody else would do. As host, we leave before the others to take the floor. But I would like first to thank you, all the panelists, and I think it's a very interesting discussion because we talk about pollution, we talk of health, and I think in the first presentations, what was shown very clearly, that in the middle you have industrialization. And it's true that industrialization has created the growth, has created tremendous possibilities for people to have new opportunities. If you think that since 1990 to now, you have almost 90% of the poverty that has decreased in East Asia. It's phenomenal. At the same time, it has been done, we know, not always the right way. That's why we have to really move towards a green industrialization, a sustainable industrialization. But as Mr. Potočnik just said, it's true that those who have the capacity should really show the example. And it should start here. And we should do more here in Europe and in advanced countries. But also, it will not work if those starting their first industrial revolution in many countries, we are talking about the fourth industrial revolution, but some countries are starting their first industrial revolution. And if we don't bring them the tools of the fourth industrial revolution to do their first industrial revolution, it means using all the possibilities, knowledge on resource efficiency and cleaner production, already introducing the circular economy, using sustainable energy, and all of this we have here. And we definitely need to invest more to support those countries using all those tools that exist. And I think we can really, all together, find a solution. But we need more investment, we need more transfer of knowledge and technology. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no more...
If I may, I would react on one thing that I think it's worth highlighting. There was a couple of comments on diesel. I don't want to look contrarian, but I think we need to qualify it. It's old diesel. It's people that remove filters from diesel that creates the problems. I am afraid that we might shooting ourselves in the foot if we mix things up. I quickly say what I mean. Particles are said to kill in Europe 400,000 people. NOx, which we know where it comes from, is 70,000. So I think we have to, first of all, rank the threat, as was said before. And the point is that we have now, by law, all diesels, unless they take the filter out, which are filtered. And they are 2 or 3 orders of magnitude lower emissions than gasoline direct injection, which is growing, which has no filter. So I think to cities, I would say the message, all unfiltered cars should be banned, while filtered one, I mean, I think that otherwise we risk of giving up something like 20% CO2 benefits and making a problem for the future. Also because there are proof that gasoline exhaust is more genotoxic than diesel one. So I think we need a more articulated, because otherwise we are fighting the previous war.
Thank you very much. Obviously, there is a need for more research, more awareness raising. So with that, I'd like to turn to the panel to see if they have a few last words before I give the floor to Danielle Kalea.
Can I make one more small comment? Just in case there's any journalists here in the room, because what we've seen, I think, since the launch of the report is that, of course, for media it's very interesting to focus on the big numbers of 9 million deaths and so on. But I think that it is very crucial, and the journalists do have a responsibility to really point out that we have solutions for this, that this is absolutely preventable, and that this needs to basically be the core piece of every thing we read there, that the question must be not what is the big number, but rather why is it so high, what is the step we need to take, and why is no one taking these steps that we have outlined in this report? So just as a final comment.
Thank you. Any others? No. Richard.
I just want to say it's great to see everyone here, and I'm really pleased to hear these issues that we've brought forward be thought in exactly the same way, and I'm really thrilled to share and be part of all this and see such a great response to all of this. So thank you all. It's heartwarming to see. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. We must also recognize Richard's and Pure Earth's leadership in putting together the Global Alliance on Health and Pollution, which has existed since 2012, and it brings the UN family, including UNEP, UNIDO, UNDP, but also the World Bank, other development banks such as the Asian Development Bank, and many, many low and middle income country governments, plus a lot of bilateral donors. So this is a platform which has been working well, and it is under the auspices of this platform, Global Alliance on Health and Pollution, that the Commission on Pollution and Health was established, and the Lancet published the report. Thank you very much all. Now, he doesn't need any introductions. I would like to invite Danielle Kalea Crespo to do the closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and let me say I'm very happy to be with you today. Apologies because I was a little bit late, but I have an excuse. I was in Strasbourg yesterday till 1 o'clock in the morning fighting pollution. We were in the 4th trilogue on what will be the most ambitious reform of the waste legislation in Europe. We are talking about increasing dramatically the recycling targets in Europe. We are talking about limiting landfilling. We are talking about a very, very important reform of all the waste legislation, which is essential also to fight pollution. So I'm sorry I arrived a little bit late. I would like to thank Maastricht University for hosting us here. I would also like to thank Richard Fuller for his excellent work.
the brilliant presentations. I arrived in time to listen to presentations, and of course I would also like to thank very much UNIDO and UN Environment for the excellent cooperation. I have very little to say because I think the report in itself is extremely important. And I think it has certainly hit the public attention. The figures are there, and I think it is very important to repeat them, and to repeat them, and to repeat them. Why? Because it really is a serious issue. We tend to underestimate the problems of pollution, and when you see the number of deaths, when you see the impact it has on our population, and when you see the difference with diseases or with the deaths in conflict, it is really a very, very serious issue. I think it is also, and it has been said, an issue of equity. The fact that this hits more hardly less developed countries. The fact that children are the main victims. I think these are also moral issues, ethical matters that we have to take into account. So I think the first point is that it is extremely important to continue providing the maximum. I have another one. I think they listen to me very well. even without a microphone, maybe it's better. So, I was saying awareness, raising, continue, because I think it is very important. Second thing I would like to say, the word solutions has been mentioned. Once we draw the attention, the second message is there are solutions. I think this is not, we say in Spanish, una fatalidad. This is not something, this is not a fatality. I don't know if this is the English word, but we can actually do things. And I think here there are important messages, and I'm going to react to some of the questions, some of the challenges. First of all, the international community is reacting. I think the Nairobi meeting will be extremely important. To have a meeting of the UN Environment with 190 countries, with a strong presence of ministers, and putting pollution in the center is extremely important. In the last meeting of ministers we had in Luxembourg, in the last Council of Environment, Eric Solheim came and he drew the attention to the ministers on the importance. And I think the preparations are going very well. Europe will be very well prepared. In fact, we have our position already agreed, and we will be very concrete in our pledges. And we will come with regulatory pledges, but we will also come with a concrete package on what we are actually going to do to face this issue. So the international community is very important. I think in the European Union, we are also leading in the way forward, and the whole circular economy agenda is a very good example. We are changing actually the economic model. We are trying to keep the resources, to maintain them in the production system as much as we can, to eliminate the environmental damage. The more you recycle, the more you reuse, the more you reduce the energy consumption, the more you work on eco-design, the more you go for green public procurement, the more that you are working in these elements, the less damage to the environment. But the good news is that this is not contradictory with economic growth and jobs. So there's a very important economic agenda, and there's a very important social agenda, because we are talking about the jobs of the future. Innovation and investment will be the big drivers of the circular economy. So I would like to inform you that of the 54 measures that we proposed in our action plan in December 2015, more than half of them have already been proposed or adopted. And we will be on track by 2020 with this very ambitious package in which we are working very hard. Next year, we are going to table our proposals on sustainable finance, green finance. How do we mobilize the finance to ensure the circular economy transition? We will come with a reflection paper also on the SDGs,
because the SDGs have also been mentioned, the International Agenda for Sustainable Development. And we will also come with two very important initiatives, one on bioeconomy, we are updating our strategy, and the other on product policy, because I think we should not forget the importance of the product footprint of product policy in this area. So the EU is working, we are leading by example. We are also supporting third countries. And the question on work with DG DevCo was mentioned. Well, I think at the origin of the Lancet report was support from the EU of almost 13 million euros over the past years, and we have to continue committed. But this is not just programs, abstract, budgetary lines, it is also concrete things. And I am very satisfied of the work that we are doing, in particular with our missions to third countries. Last week, and I'm very pleased that Nilgun from UNIDO is here, we were together in Medellin and Bogota, and we were supporting Colombian authorities, but also Colombian business on waste treatment, on water, on circular economy, with an important mission with more than 80 European organizations, companies, NGOs, supporting and advising and trying to help countries which want to develop in a different way. We were in South Africa, Astrid is there, we have been in China, we have been in Chile, and next year we will continue. The circular economy missions are also an effort in very concrete terms, working also with international organizations in supporting these countries to develop. But all this is not enough, because the role of cities has been mentioned. And I think it is very important, and I was listening very attentively to what Janis Potočnik was saying about the cities. And 80% of the people will be living in cities in 2050. And this figure that 50% of the cities have not yet been built is very, very impressive. With one of the colleagues in the back from DG DevCo, this shows that we work very closely with DG DevCo. We were in China in the desertification convention in September in a city called Ordos, which I could not find in my map. The city is huge. It has hundreds of buildings, thousands of motorways. And when you ask how many people live here, the answer is 2 million. 2 million will be living because the city is built, but they have not yet arrived. And when you say, what is the main activity of this city? The answer is construction. So I think this is an illustration of what is really happening in the world. And this is also raising challenges. We will be doing in Paris the Clean Air Forum. And I want to say a few words about the clean air because it has been mentioned. And because sometimes we say pollution is a problem for developing countries, it's also a very serious problem for developed countries. And Europe has to get its act together. 400,000 deaths linked to air pollution. These are the latest figures also coming from the Environmental Agency, the latest report. We need to do something. Solutions have to be found, but there will be no solution if the cities are not involved. And we are doing a lot. We have our green capital, we have our programs linked to cities, but we are now developing these clean air dialogues. And the clean air dialogues are working together with the cities across Europe. We will have the mayor of Paris, we will have the French Minister for Environment, a very big event, the 17th of November, where we would like to continue and where it will also be an opportunity to discuss the challenges and also the solutions. I have very little less to add. I would like to congratulate the authors of the report. I would like to say that we are confronted with a very serious problem, but when you are confronted with a serious problem and you are working towards the solutions, I think you have done half of the way. The worst thing is to deny the issues. And I think now everybody understands what is at stake. We need to continue the awareness raising. I would like to inform you also that we count with the participation on Richard in Nairobi. We'll be invited to the breakfast we are organizing on this topic. And I think if we are able to work together, to join forces, to show that there is an agenda for change, that Europe can lead, that Europe can support, that the circular economy, that green growth, that tackling the problems which the citizens are facing is a possibility, I think a lot can be done. If the international community in Nairobi also comes with a strong response, as we expect, I think working together we can do a lot. The awareness is very important, and it has started with your report. I think what we need over the coming years is to go from the words to the actions and make sure that we can put in place all these measures. There is not a silver bullet. We will need to work in different areas, but I am confident that we will be able to make a lot of progress and that we will be able to cut down these figures, to increase the quality of life of our citizens, and what is more important at the end of the day, to preserve our planet. Thank you.